Hello again, Ness Hughes here with you for day 2 of this week's devotions. We're going straight into the story today where we find ourselves well and truly in the complication. You're probably familiar with narrative norms, orientation, which we had yesterday, that's the setting, followed by complication, which heads toward a climax. Before then we reach the resolution. This is the normal structure of a narrative. And Ruth, the book, stays pretty true to form. Yesterday, in the orientation, the setting, we read that Naomi had left Judah, the town of Bethlehem, mental note, with her husband and 2 sons. Escaping famine, her 2 sons had married local Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. And as we left the story yesterday, it had taken a bleak turn with all 3 men dead. And as the complication then starts to be detailed for us later on in chapter 1, which we read today, we see that it heads toward climax because the reality is, in the ancient world, this situation left 3 women destitute. No sure income, no provision, exposed and vulnerable. And so heading into the text now, we find that the news had reached them that in the 10 years since they'd been gone, God had provided for Judah, and it was safe now to return home. Well, home for Naomi anyway. Let's pick up now in the story, reading from chapter 1, verse 8. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to 2 sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Well, we see clearly the reality of the situation given this ancient context. Without her husband and 2 sons, there's just no stability or prospect for any positive future for Naomi, so it seems. And so even while there are deep bonds evident between these 3 women, notice the weeping and the affection and the repeated use of that word kindness, Naomi insists that Orpah and Ruth restart their life in their hometown. Because from Naomi's point of view, there's no hope for them with her. Indeed, we get the sense that she feels there's no hope for her at all. She says, "It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." This is Naomi's perception, that not only is her situation hopeless, but that her God has turned against her. Orpah takes Naomi's advice, and though sad to be saying goodbye, she returns to her family and their gods. Ruth, however, persists with unexpected kindness and loyalty. I'm reading now from verse 16. "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. This is incredible. Not because she expects a turnaround in their circumstances, but out of dedication and love, Ruth chooses to return to Judah with Naomi. And more than just loyal support, Ruth goes further because she inspires Naomi not to abandon Yahweh, even if she thinks he may have abandoned her. Ruth says, "Your God will be my God." They're leaving behind these foreign lands and their foreign gods and walking back toward God and his people. It's Ruth, the Moabite, who names and recaptures the importance of these things. In verse 17, when Ruth says, "May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me," she uses the word for Yahweh here. This shows us that she indeed surrenders her whole life to the hands of Yahweh, even while she dedicates herself to Naomi, one of his people. It's a powerful, admirable decision. And so they set off. From verse 19 now. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Man, you can't miss the tone of the drama in these verses, can you? Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Mara means bitter. It has that real sort of down in the dumps tone, doesn't it? A bit Eeyore. Don't even call me Naomi, call me bitter. And as we sit in this part of the narrative, the complication, we're really heightened to the problem she faces. She describes herself as empty. Empty in the sense of no husband and sons. She'd gone full and she's returned empty. And as we've read earlier, she expects this emptiness to prevail. There's no hope for her for the future. No hope for future sons. She's far too old for that. And in any case, she's unlikely to remarry anyway. In addition to her personal grief and hopelessness, which is acute here, there's also underlying another threat, a threat this time to the line of Elimelech. Who will pass on the family line? Who will carry on the inheritance? And so personal loss and bitterness is also attached to the threat to the descendants, actually, of God's people. And this is where we leave the story today. As well-read people, we know how narratives work, so we still have a sense of anticipation, don't we, that there might be some hope. But the question is, how will this be resolved? Where will their help come from? In fact, perhaps these questions are not so foreign to you. This story of Ruth is real. It's historical. Naomi's despair is real, and her questions about where God is in the midst of her troubles are reasonable. I pray for you that wherever you're up to today, before we tie things up in a neat bow in the narrative, that you feel seen and heard in your own desperation and grief. God is not ignorant of our suffering. The human experience of loss and disappointment and hopelessness is represented in the pages of Scripture. And so I pray blessing upon you that you may draw comfort from this validation and representation. And I pray for you that you might recapture that sense of anticipation of what might be next in your life, as indeed we feel that in the sense of what's next in the book of Ruth. God hears his people and he's with you. Chapter 1 ends today. The barley harvest was beginning. There had been famine, but the crops are yielding again. There is an inkling of something around the corner. Even in the desperation you may feel, in God, there's always reason to remain hopeful. And I look forward to discovering this with you more tomorrow as we re-enter the pages of Ruth.